He was a man who buried his past with his own hands. They were two girls left for dead beneath canvas and weeds. What brought them together wasn't blood or fate, it was something far more powerful. In a land where silence screams louder than guns, witness how a single act of quiet kindness could rewrite 3 broken lives forever. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story. It's a resurrection. The sky that evening looked like an old bruise, a deep smear of violet and rust stretching over the lonely stretch of the Grand Canyon's northern rim. Light faded slow-heavy like it didn't want to leave. Wind rolled through the rocks with a hush that sounded too much like memory. There were no trains anymore. Hadn't been for years. Just the bones of old rails, the husk of a water tower, and the slow, solemn quiet of a place that had been forgotten on purpose. Jonas Callahan hadn't meant to ride that way. He hadn't meant to stop at the switchback curve where the canyon met the dust. But something in his bones, or maybe something in his horse, tugged him off course. He dismounted slow, his boots pressing into dry earth that cracked like brittle parchment. For a man who'd made peace with ghosts long ago, it was strange to feel unsettled again. There was a stillness that didn't feel right. Not like peace. Like pause. Jonas walked with the slow, deliberate quiet of someone who had seen too much. A rifle rested across his back not for show, and his hand stayed near the rain slicker tied at his side just in case the sky decided to cry. That's when he saw it, a shape near the old station ruins. At first it looked like discarded cloth, maybe canvas. But the wind lifted a corner, and beneath it he caught sight of a knee. Small, bare, dirty, and still. Jonas didn't move fast. He'd learned a long time ago that fast scared things off, and sometimes fast got you killed. He knelt close, careful not to cast a shadow. The tarp was poorly laid, dust-caked, and tangled with dead weeds. He peeled it back inch by inch until the truth lay open like a wound. 2 girls. One, older, maybe 9, her limbs long and thinner dress 2 sizes too big. The other was tiny, curled into herself like something trying to disappear. Jonas didn't speak. Didn't ask. Their skin was chapped, lips dry. The older girl's elbow stuck out wrong, and when he looked in her eyes, gray, unblinking, watchful, he saw something that hurt worse than any bullet ever had. She expected him to hurt her. The younger one didn't wake. Her mouth moved slightly, whispering to no one. Jonas crouched there in silence, heart pounding slow but hard. He set his rifle down and said the first thing that came to mind. "I got bread," he murmured. "In my saddlebag, still warm." Nothing, not a flinch. So he just sat cross-legged in the dirt beside them. The sun dropped behind the canyon wall like a coin disappearing in water. Coyotes started calling, long and lonesome. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The older girl shifted. Just a nod. Not to him, but to the smaller one, as if giving permission to survive. By the time he carried them to his horse, neither girl had said a word. They didn't have to. Jonas understood fear well enough. The older one held on to the younger all the way back, like if she let go, the dark would swallow them whole. The trail home was quiet. Cottonwoods loomed like watchmen. The cabin waited still and dark. Jonas lit a single lantern no more. The place was tidy but unlived in. Beth's shawl still hung by the door untouched since she passed. The hearth was clean, the mirror cracked. The bed made with stiff sheets that hadn't warmed a body in years. He laid the smaller girl on the cot, gave the older one a cloth and water. Didn't press when she refused to undress. He found rags, soap, even a comb. Left them without a word. Then he stepped outside and cried. Not loud, just a single breath that turned sharp. Not because he found them, but because he knew. He knew what kind of evil left children in the dirt under canvas and weeds. He'd seen it before. Hell, he'd smelled it in the way the wind changed. That night, he didn't sleep. He stayed near the fire watching it like a guard dog. The girls huddled near the warmth, not on the cot. That felt too much like comfort, and comfort was something they didn't trust yet. Sometime after midnight, the older one whispered something. Jonas didn't catch it all, just fragments. Don't look like them. He didn't ask who them were. He didn't ask anything at all. Questions were like rocks. Best left unturned until folks were ready. When morning came soft and gray, he brewed chicory and cracked eggs into a pan. The smell roused the older girl. She blinked at him like he was a puzzle, missing all the edge pieces. "Your mom a cook?" he asked. She nodded, barely. "Mine too," he said. "Burned the edges, made 'em taste like home." It was a story he made up. His mama had never cooked a thing in her life. But the lie felt warm, and maybe that was enough. They ate in silence. Then the girl spoke. One sentence. A whisper. "You gonna send us back?" Jonas looked at her. Her face didn't hold fear, just tired, like someone who'd run too far. "I don't send folks back till they stop running," he said. "And even then, only if they ask." She nodded, almost like she believed him. The canyon outside stretched wide and red and endless. But inside that tiny cabin, something had shifted. Something fragile. A beginning. And for the first time in years, Jonas Callahan didn't feel like a man waiting to die. He felt like someone with a job to do, a reason to keep the fire lit. He didn't know their names yet, but he would. And when he did, he'd make sure no one ever forgot them again. The sky above the canyon had shifted by the next morning, a softer hue settling in like the world itself was holding its breath. Jonas Callahan stood by the stove, listening to the pan sizzle while the two girls remained quiet as shadows. The smaller one, he still didn't know her name, sat with her knees drawn up, cradling something invisible. The older girl, eyes still sharp but less guarded, watched him as though waiting for him to change shape. As if kindness was a mask people wore just long enough to disappoint you. Jonas had seen that look before, in Warren barrooms in the eyes of folks who'd had to grow up too fast, but he'd never seen it burn so fiercely in a child. That fire was what unsettled him most, not because it scared him, but because he knew what it cost to carry. She hadn't spoken again since the question, "You gonna send us back?" But her silence now felt less like fear and more like assessment, as if she were running numbers in her head trying to decide whether this stranger with a rifle and a cabin had earned the right to protect them. Jonas laid the plate down slowly. 2 eggs still warm. A heel of bread, slightly burnt at the edge. "Beth used to say I couldn't make toast without setting off the fire," he said gently. No one responded, but he thought the older girl's jaw twitched. He didn't push. Instead, he stepped outside and let the wind run through his thoughts. The land stretched wide and unchanging, but something about the air felt restless, like something was watching. Maybe it was just the past. When he came back inside, he found the older girl tidying the crumbs on the table. Not eating, just organizing. The smaller one hadn't moved. Her small hands now pressed buttons into the rug buttons Jonas didn't remember owning. "You find those?" he asked softly. The girl didn't speak, but her head tilted toward the drawer under the sink. She had built a shape with them 3 figures standing close. One smaller, almost cradled by the other 2. That was the moment Jonas understood. They weren't just hiding. They were surviving. He got on his knees slowly so he wouldn't startle them. "You mind if I fix that doll of yours?" he asked the smaller one. She didn't look up, but she slid it toward him. It was from Beth's old box. He hadn't touched it in years. He carried it to the chair by the fire, the one Beth always used, and began sewing the torn arm back on. The thread was coarse, but he worked slow, purposeful. He wasn't fixing a doll. He was patching something far more fragile. The older girl sat across from him, knees to her chest, watching every stitch. "You sew?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not good," she muttered. "Beth didn't either," he replied with a chuckle. "She just made up the rest." That got him a look. Not a smile, but something close. Her name, he realized, would come later. But her soul. It was already here, pressed up against the walls, testing if they'd hold. "We weren't running," she said suddenly. "We were hiding." Jonas nodded once. Good to know. Hiding takes courage. She blinked, like that wasn't the answer she expected. Later that day, he gave her a journal, blank pages, a charcoal pencil. He didn't say why, just left it near the hearth. That night, he found a folded page by the fire. 3 stick figures, no names, just one word, safe. He didn't ask who drew it. The next evening brought rain, real rain, the kind that thumped like angry footsteps across the roof. Thunder rolled low and mean. The younger girl screamed. Jonas bolted upright. She was under the table hands clamped over her ears. The older one stood frozen, her face pale, eyes wide like she was back somewhere else. "She thinks it's him," she said. "When it storms." Jonas crouched beside the table, not touching, just waiting. The girl peeked through her fingers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, after they'd calmed, he brought down another box from the shelf. Inside were ribbons, thimbles, and a tiny pouch of rose seeds. Beth had saved them, hoping to plant a garden for the child they never had. He placed the pouch in the older girl's hand. "Beth was gonna plant these when we had a girl. Figured you might know what to do with them." She stared at the pouch like it might turn to ash. "Why give 'em to me?" she asked. "You look like you could grow something," he said, "given the right dirt." That night, both girls ate second helpings. The smaller one even reached for more bread. Jonas noticed how she curled her toes differently now, not tucked under like she expected pain, just free. Outside, the wind whispered through the canyon, and for the first time since Beth died, Jonas felt the house breathe. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew this much. The fire in that girl's eyes wasn't rage. It was the last light of someone who hadn't given up hope. The days that followed did not pass quickly nor slow. They moved like river ice in early spring, solid on top but trembling underneath. Jonas Callahan felt the shift in the quiet. It wasn't the kind that came from the wind or a change in weather. It came from inside the cabin. Inside them. The older girl, who still hadn't offered her name, had started sweeping the floor each morning. Not because he asked. She just did. And when Jonas nailed back the shutters that flapped too much in the wind, she handed him the hammer like it was a decision, not a tool. The younger girl, still silent, took to following sunlight across the room. She sat where it landed, tracing the grain in the floorboards with her finger. Sometimes she lined up her buttons. Sometimes she just stared. But she didn't flinch anymore when Jonas walked past her. He began to leave things out on purpose. A spool of thread, a spoon carved from walnut, a small tin box of seeds. Each morning, one of the items would be moved, touched, sometimes placed somewhere new, as if the girls were rearranging the world to see if it could stay safe. One evening, Jonas brought in an old chair from the barn, child-sized, made of pine, rough but steady. Beth had sanded it once, left it unfinished. He set it by the hearth next to her old rocker and said nothing. The next morning, the younger girl was sitting in it, knees tucked under her, humming something tuneless. The sound knocked something loose in Jonas's chest. He'd stopped humming a long time ago. Later, he began building a fence. Not a tall one, just a modest line of posts around the garden patch where weeds had taken over. He hadn't kept livestock in years, but the work gave his hands something to do and his thoughts somewhere to land. The older girl stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, watching him. After a while, she walked down, picked up the level, and checked the post he'd just set. "That one leans," she said. He looked at her. "Think you can do better?" She gave him a look. "I know I can." He chuckled, handed her the hammer, and let her try. Her swings were sharp, angry, and precise. "You buildin' to keep things out?" she asked after a while. He shook his head. "No, miss. Buildin' to keep things in. Things worth keeping." She didn't reply, but she stayed. They planted the garden together. Beans first, then tomatoes, then finally the rose seeds. The older girl pressed them into the soil with a kind of reverence Jonas hadn't expected. "Used to think nothing would grow near me," she said, voice quiet. Jonas looked at her. "Let this be your proof." When the first shoot pushed through the dirt 3 days later, she didn't say anything, but Jonas saw her watching it like it might disappear if she blinked. That night he left a soft piece of cotton on the table. Pale blue. Beth would have made a dress out of it. Instead, it sat beside the fire for 2 days before the older girl touched it. She traced the edge, then looked at Jonas. "What color would you pick for yourself?" he asked. She didn't answer. But that evening he found her sketching with the charcoal pencil. Flowers. Blue lavender gold. Blooms that hadn't yet sprouted in the yard, but maybe would. That was the first time she let him braid her hair. She sat by the hearth, eyes closed, while Jonas fumbled with the strands like he was learning a language without words. He hadn't done it since Beth asked him to practice, just in case they had a daughter. "Mama used to pull," the girl said suddenly. When she was mad, she pulled so hard it hurt. Jonas's hands stilled. "I won't pull. I know." That was all. They didn't go into town, not yet. The last time Jonas had ventured in for supplies, the stares had been louder than words. Folks always noticed what didn't match. A man with 2 girls who didn't look like kin. A cabin that had been empty too long. But out here under the sky, they were just people trying to survive. One afternoon, the older girl found him in the barn. She held a carved shape in her palm. A star, rough and uneven, like someone had tried to make sense of the sky with a knife. "Made it for you," she said. Jonas took it, carefully held it, like it was more fragile than it looked. "Thank you," he said. "Don't lose it. That one's for when it gets dark." The fence was nearly done. The posts stood straight now. The wire stretched tight. The garden had sprouted. The girls no longer hovered at the edge of the room. One morning, Jonas found them curled together by the hearth. The doll with the sewn arm tucked between them. The younger girl was snoring softly, and the older one was humming that same tuneless song. He didn't wake them. Just stepped outside and let the sun hit his face. He'd buried a lot in this life. Hope, a name, a future that never arrived. But today something was growing, and for the first time in years he believed it might stay. The wind changed the day the knock came. It wasn't loud, just 3 deliberate raps on the cabin door, but it felt like the earth shifted beneath it. Jonas Callahan was standing by the stove, the kettle just beginning to sing when he heard it. The sound was small, almost polite, but it carried the weight of something that did not ask permission. He turned slow, his hand steady on the edge of the table. Across the room, the girls froze. The younger one, Evie, as he'd heard her called in sleep, clutched the doll with the stitched arm. The older girl, who still hadn't spoken her true name, rose from her seat without a word and moved instinctively to stand between her sister and the door. Jonas opened it with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. On the other side stood a figure dressed in gray, a long coat dusted with trail dirt, a badge gleaming faintly on his chest. "Morning, Callahan," the sheriff said. He didn't tip his hat, didn't smile. Jonas didn't move from the threshold. "You're a long way from town, Sheriff." The man shrugged. "Heard word 2 girls came through this way. Young. Didn't belong to nobody. You seen anyone?" Behind Jonas, the girls didn't breathe. "Seen a lot of things," Jonas replied. "Buzzards, dust storms, old regrets. Girls can't say for sure." The sheriff's eyes slid past him into the cabin. "Town's curious. Folks remember. You know how they talk." Jonas did. He stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. "You got something to say, Sheriff, say it. Don't waste my time with ghost talk." The lawman looked him over. "There's a man riding north, says he's got papers, claims those girls belong to him." Jonas's jaw worked slow. "Children aren't property. That's not for you to decide," the sheriff said flatly. "You want to harbor fugitives, you best be ready for what comes with it." He turned without another word and walked off. Jonas watched him go until the sound of hooves faded. When he went back inside, both girls were still in the same spot, staring. "They'll take us," the older one said. "Not fear, just certainty." "Not while I'm standing," Jonas answered. "You can't stop the law," she whispered. "I can slow it down." That night, the air was too still. Jonas sat outside sharpening his knife, the rasp of stone against steel the only sound for miles. He thought of Beth, of the child they never had, of graves dug with bare hands and names never spoken aloud. The next morning, the wind howled in early. From the ridge, Jonas saw a figure watching. Not close, just there. Later, he found the older girl in the barn, her face tight, her breath sharp. "He's coming," she said. "He said if we breathed wrong again, he'd find us." Jonas didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Instead, he fetched Beth's Bible from the shelf. Inside was a folded paper brittle with age. He handed it to her. "Beth wrote this when we lost the baby. Said sometimes faith ain't about believing. Sometimes it's just about holding on till the morning." The girl held it like it might crumble, but she didn't let go. The next day the letter came. No stamp, no return, just one sentence scribbled in a harsh hand. "He's coming. Not alone." Sunday. Jonas read it once and hid it beneath the floorboard near Beth's rocker. Then he taught Evie how to ring the bell outside if someone came and he wasn't home. Taught the older girl how to light the lanterns without burning her fingers. On Friday night, she brought him Beth's Bible. "I want to give this back," she said. "Why? Because I want to start with something that's mine." Jonas set it gently beside her and gave her the carved star from his coat pocket. "You already did." Saturday passed like fog. Jonas rode into town and came back with flower nails and 2 tin cups. The clerk barely met his eye. That night, the older girl stood at the mirror touching the ribbon in her hair. She spoke without looking up. "She's talking more, Evie, you noticed." "She's healing," Jonas said. "So why do I feel like we're breaking? Because tomorrow's Sunday." She flinched, then whispered, "I've dreamed of killing him." Jonas didn't move. "But you didn't. No." "That's the difference," he said, "between what they made you and what you are." Her voice cracked. "What if they take us anyway?" Jonas stepped close, his voice low. "Then they'll have to walk through me." "You'd get hurt. I've been hurt before. Would you do it, even if we weren't yours?" He looked at her full and steady. "You are." That night the storm rolled in early. Thunder over the canyon. Wind scraping against the windows like claws. She stood by the fire candle and hand eyes wide. "I want you to see," Jonas said. "What light does in the dark." She held it high, her name still unspoken, until she whispered it. "Eleanor. My name is Eleanor Rose." Jonas breathed it in like a prayer. Then he turned toward the east, because come morning the reckoning would ride in with the sun. The sunrise came red, smeared like blood across the canyon rim. It wasn't warm, it was warning. The air carried the weight of something final. Jonas Callahan stood on the porch rifle resting in his arms, boots planted firm. The girls were inside, safe for now. But that might change before midday. Dust rose before the riders came into view. 3 of them. The man in front wore black, the kind of coat meant for funerals or final statements. His smile was wrong thin and sharp, with eyes that had no kindness in them. He dismounted slow. Didn't rush, didn't need to. Men like that came with the certainty of ownership. "You took what was mine," he said, his voice like gravel. Jonas didn't blink. "They were never yours. Paper says different." Jonas stepped down from the porch. "Paper don't make you a father, just makes you dangerous." The man's name was Huxley. Jonas knew the name before he ever heard it, knew the type. A man who collected control like land, who saw silence as obedience and fear as a kind of affection. Behind Jonas, the door creaked. Eleanor stepped outside. "Don't," Jonas murmured. "I have to," she said. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout, just stood there, arms at her sides like stone carved from grief. "You lit the barn," she said. "You locked us in. You told Mama we weren't children anymore." Huxley's smile faltered. "I gave you a roof. I gave you order." "You gave us a sentence," she replied. Then everything broke. Huxley reached for his pistol. Fast, but not faster than a man with purpose. Jonas's rifle cracked once. Huxley dropped his gun with a scream, blood blooming from his hand. The 2 men behind him didn't draw. One nudged his horse backward. The other looked away. Jonas aimed steady. "Take him and ride." They didn't argue. Minutes later, the riders disappeared into the horizon. Huxley didn't look back. Jonas walked back to the porch, hand shaking. Inside, Evie was under the table, her arms over her head. Eleanor sat on the steps, staring out across the land like it had just introduced itself. "I thought I'd be braver," she whispered. "You were." "No." I wanted to scream, to fight. You didn't need to. She folded her arms, holding herself tight. "You saved her," Jonas said. "That day in the barn, you dragged her out." Eleanor didn't answer. Then she looked at him, eyes red. "She was all I had. Now you've got more." Jonas sat beside her, and he cried. Not loud, just enough. Enough to shake something loose. Enough to name all the things he'd buried. Eleanor set a hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "Only when it's real." They went inside. Evie was asleep, curled beneath the rocker, the doll tucked against her chest. Eleanor pulled a blanket over her and sat by the fire. She held Jonas's carved star in her hands. "We're staying," she said. Her voice was soft. "Sure." Jonas looked up. "If you'll have us." He nodded. Couldn't speak. Weeks passed. The garden grew wild. Tomatoes climbing the fence. Beans curling around posts. The rosebush bloomed, first one stubborn red flower, pushing through the green like hope with thorns. Evie laughed now, not loud, not often, but real. Eleanor walked with her in the mornings, pointing to plants, whispering stories Jonas couldn't hear. They built a scarecrow, painted its face with coal, and gave it Beth's old bonnet. Jonas let them. He didn't stop Eleanor when she asked to repaint the shutters. Didn't say no when she braided his hair as a joke. In fact, he almost smiled. One night, Eleanor found Jonas carving by the fire. "What is it?" she asked. "Chair," he said. "For Evie, one her size." She smiled. "Just a flicker. She'll like that." He glanced at her. "And you, I don't need a chair." "Maybe not, but you deserve one." She didn't reply, but the next day she brought him a drawing. 3 figures on a hill, stick arms and big hands. No names, just the word home. Jonas pinned it to the wall. They didn't talk about town, about the sheriff, about what might come later. But one evening, Eleanor asked, "Do you think he'll come back?" Jonas stirred the coals. "I think he'll remember who stood in his way." She nodded. "Good." That night, lightning flickered in the distance, but the storm never came. Evie sat in her little chair, rocking slow. Eleanor rested against the windowsill, the candle beside her. Jonas stood on the porch, watching the dark. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for something to end. He was watching something begin. Then came spring, the kind that crept in quietly without fanfare. The girls planted sunflowers beside the tomatoes. Jonas built a wooden swing between the cottonwoods, and Evie squealed when it lifted her toes off the ground. Eleanor sat beneath the rosebush one morning, sketching. When Jonas brought her a mug of chicory, she handed him a page, a picture of the cabin. Smoke from the chimney flowers blooming along the fence, but in the corner, 3 figures sitting close. This time, they had names. He traced the letters. Eleanor, Evie, Jonas. "I like how you wrote them," he said. "It feels real." It is, and it was. Even if the world outside didn't understand. Even if the past still knocked sometimes in his dreams. Inside this home, carved by fire and faith, they had found something rare. Something worth keeping. Something that grew where the light touched it. The story of Jonas Callahan. Eleanor and little Evie is not just a tale of survival, it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of quiet, steadfast love. Jonas was a man shaped by grief, softened by time, and buried beneath the dust of a life he thought had ended long ago. His cabin wasn't just a place, it was a mausoleum of memories of the wife he lost, the daughter who never came, and the man he used to be. But life, unpredictable and unrelenting, had other plans. When he found the girls abandoned, battered, and clinging to silence, it wasn't heroism that moved him. It was something simpler, something more enduring: decency. He didn't save them with grand gestures or gallant speeches. He saved them by staying. By showing up every morning with warm bread, by lighting a single lantern, by fixing a doll's arm with thread that had sat untouched since spring. Eleanor, too, was not just a victim. Beneath her guarded eyes was the strength of someone who had chosen again and again to keep her sister alive when the world tried to forget them. She was the one who nodded when it was time to eat, the one who stepped between danger and the small flicker of hope they carried. And when she finally spoke her name, Eleanor rose. It was not a reclamation. It was a rebirth. Evie, silent and small, gave them both something neither realized they needed: a reason. Her buttons arranged like families. Her laugh, when it finally returned, bouncing off the cabin walls like wind chimes in spring. She was the seed, the beginning, the reason a rose bloomed in cracked soil. And Jonas. He changed, slowly, deliberately. Each nail driven into the fence was a prayer. Each chair carved was a confession. He stopped waiting for death and started planting for tomorrow. He became what he'd long believed he couldn't be anymore: a father. When Huxley came, the storm they feared took shape: papers and law and men who thought possession was proof. But Jonas stood. Not because he had to, but because love, once it takes root, cannot retreat. One shot ended the claim, but it was Eleanor's voice, steady and clear, that ended the power. They stayed. The cabin, once silent, sang with life. Chicory in the mornings, drawings on the walls, a garden grown not for survival, but for beauty. Jonas never asked for thanks, and the girls never owed him one. But in the way Evie took his hand and the way Eleanor sketched their names together, the gratitude was clear. This story is not about violence or vengeance. It's about healing, about what happens when you take someone in not to fix them, but to simply hold space for their becoming. It's about the small acts that stack day after day until safety becomes belief and belief becomes love. So, what can we take from this? First, that family is not defined by blood. It is defined by choice, by action, by the willingness to stay when others leave. Second, that redemption doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It comes like a seed, quiet, patient, demanding care and time, and the courage to keep watering even when it hasn't sprouted yet. Third, that no one is too broken to begin again. Whether you are the child hiding under the table, the woman with fire in her eyes, or the man sitting quietly with a rifle across his knees, you are not finished. Not yet. In our modern world, we are taught to chase after the grand, to seek fast solutions, to fix, to forget. But maybe what we need more is to pause, to notice the quiet ones, to mend the small tears, to plant something and wait for it to grow, to make room in our lives for those who have been discarded by the noise. Maybe you are Jonas waiting in the dark, or maybe you are Eleanor holding pain with both hands. Maybe you are Evie trying to believe in warmth again. Wherever you are, remember healing happens in the presence of kindness. Growth happens when someone says, stay. And maybe the greatest thing we can do is exactly what Jonas did. Open the door, light the fire, and say nothing more than, you don't got to go nowhere. If this story touched your heart, if you found a piece of yourself in these pages, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's your support that allows us to bring more of these stories to life. Stories of the forgotten, the brave, the ones who choose love in the quiet. Stick with us. There's more to tell, because sometimes the best stories aren't just told, they're felt. And this one grew where the light touched it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. And until then, keep the lantern lit.